Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So on behalf of ISKCON, Bhaktivedanta Manor and School of Bhakti, we'd like to give a warm welcome to all of you assembled here for our third session of our exclusive series of conversations that we're having with His Holiness Śivarāma Swami Mahārāja. Haribol! So we've actually gone through lots of wonderful topics so far related to Krishna consciousness. We've talked about spirituality versus science with Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu. Last week we went through a deep meditative discourse with Mahārāja on how to develop this Vrindavan consciousness and how to get into the mood of actually reading about Krishna's glories, his pastimes, and obviously this was based on his masterpiece, his 8-book set, Navavraja Mahima, which of course is available here for everyone, and Mahārāja will be signing afterwards. So today we're going to go back a bit more into contemporary topics again, and we're specifically looking nowadays in the topic of well-being, mental health. It's a very, very topical, pertinent issue in this day and age. I'm sure as Kali Yuga progresses, it will become more and more pertinent and relevant. So we've got an amazing session ahead of us today. So His Holiness Śivarāma Mahārāja will be in conversation with Her Grace Citi-Śakti Mataji. Haribol! So Mataji, of course, is a very learned scholar. She's also a professional psychiatrist. She spent many years in the professional sphere and of course in devotee communities, guiding people in their spiritual journey, and of course also balancing their spiritual lives with their material day-to-day duties and issues that we may come up with in our lives. So today's session is going to be interesting. We're divided into two separate topics. The overall is about the mind and the soul, whether it's our friend or our foe, but specifically it's going to be divided into two separate topics. The first one is whether Krishna consciousness is relevant for improving mental health in this age. We know where we're kind of inundated with social media. So that's the first topic. And the second one is whether mental health problems can be a catalyst for spiritual growth. Right? Interesting topic. Could be quite challenging as well. But it looks to be a very, very stimulating session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our two esteemed speakers today. Before we do get started, just a quick house rules again. As you know, please maintain social distancing. Please try, please, devotees, to keep your masks on, right? And of course, at the end, when you are going to do the book signings, please make sure you do it with an orderly queue around the periphery. And of course, at the end, there will be book tables and prasadam being served outside. Also, it's the day before the end of Bhadra Purnima. So there's also some Bhagavatam stalls there as well for you to, distribute to others, purchase for other people as gifts as well. Thank you so much. Without further ado, we shall start now. His Holiness Śivarāma Swami Mahārāja ki. Yeah. And Her Grace Citi-Śakti Mataji ki. Yeah. And in true manner style, let's sing or chant 3 times Haribol. Haribol! Haribol! Haribol!
Thank you all very much, and I'd like to welcome everybody. Actually, I will hand over the introduction and welcome to Citi-Śakti Devī Dāsī. But before that, I just wanted to remind everyone that yes, upcoming tomorrow is Bhadra Purnima, and you mentioned that there was Srimad Bhagavatam's. Srimad Bhagavatam is being distributed where? Oh, near the entrance. You see, I have some of these books. I write books. It's something that Srila Prabhupada asked us to do. It's a supplementary activity to our real main business, which is studying Srila Prabhupada's books. These books are optional. This is if you really got lots of time. Srila Prabhupada's books are compulsory, even if you don't have lots of time, because without those books, it is really not possible to become Krishna conscious. So I'd like to just remind everyone that this is the, well, best time of year to buy. Every day is Bhadra Purnima if you're purchasing and studying and reading Srimad Bhagavatam, but this was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's emphasis. Today is also the disappearance day of one of the great person Bhagavatas, which is Srila Haridas Thakur. So we should also keep that in mind, the life of a extraordinary personality who you can read about in Srimad Bhagavatam, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, which, like Srimad Bhagavatam, is also indispensable for our Krishna consciousness. And of course the other two books are the Bhagavad Gita and the Nectar of Devotion. So please don't neglect our spiritual development, and especially neglect the dedication and the time and energy that Srila Prabhupada put into giving us the real essence, not just of Vedic knowledge, the essence of knowledge. And I won't get into that because we're going to get off into another discussion, but those books are essential. If you don't have them on your bookshelf, then please get them, and if you have them on your bookshelf, please read them. It's not enough just to have them on the bookshelf. Citi-Śakti Devī Dāsī, on to you.
Thank you.
Patitānaṁ pāvanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
So thank you, Mahārāja, for being with us for this topic. I'd like to set the scene, if that's okay, with everybody. So the topic we're discussing today, really, we're essentially trying to understand this relationship between the mind and our Krishna consciousness, but particularly in the context of when our mind becomes disordered, when there are mental health disorders, mental health problems. What do we mean by this? There's a statistic that many of you may be familiar with, that 25% of people will experience a diagnosable mental health condition in their lifetime. If you're looking at 25%, that's a quarter of this room. That's a lot of people. So it's an issue that's significant and important for everybody, whether you're a devotee, not devotee, religious, not religious. It affects everybody because everybody has a mind. And by diagnosable mental health condition, we're not just talking about sadness here. We're talking about clinical depression. We're not talking about general worry. We're talking about anxiety disorders. We're not talking about the odd, unusual experience here and there. We're talking about things like psychosis, and also not just the odd eccentricity with our personality, things like personality disorders. So we're talking about something serious here, not just day-to-day worries. And we've seen an increase in mental health problems. Mental health problems are the #1 global burden of disease in a world where actually many people don't want for anything in terms of material things. And we see it even worse in societies where we have everything. I meet people all the time who have everything and they are completely unhappy. And not just unhappy, they have depression, they have anxiety, they have strong fear of losing everything, even though they have everything. So this is a very important subject. A number of things have contributed to it. We live in a world of brilliant communication, but poor relationships. We're living life on demand. Children don't have a natural environment to play in. They're constantly bombarded with more than they're ready for. This is what social media gives them, and it puts their identity in crisis. So with so many things just even going on materially to put a burden on our mental health, I think this really naturally really turns my interest, curiosity, and actually we want to turn to your wisdom, Mahārāja, here, and really understand, we can understand from a material perspective why things are breaking down. But are you able to please shed some light for us on what's our Krishna conscious view and why are things deteriorating for us so much in terms of our mental health?
Let me just open up by, unless you probably all know, but if you don't, I'll just make known I'm not a professional in terms of this particular field, in terms of the mental health field. although I have vast experience, or at least I'm dealing with it constantly. I'm dealing with it constantly ever since I came to Krishna Consciousness, and then when I look back from here to my youth or childhood, then I start to see similar types of conduct, similar types of issues and problems in people's lives. But my experience is that it's really on the increase and on the rise. In sort of trying to prepare a little for this presentation, I was looking both at Srila Prabhupada's statements as well as Shastra. And I think probably you're very much aware of one of the initial questions of Srimad Bhagavatam that the sages raise. If you're not, you'll find it. I'm trying to get information out of my computer, which Microsoft Word all of a sudden decided that they were going to shut down for me for some unknown reason, which was very embarrassing. And the verses found there in the first canto, first chapter, 10th verse, and the sages say, "O learned one, in this iron age of Kali, men have but short lives. They are quarrelsome, lazy, misguided, unlucky, and above all, always disturbed." Now this is Shastra. This is how Bhagavatam begins. Manda, Sumanda, Mandabhagya, Upadrita. This word, Manda, which means disturbed, gets repeated over and over again. So we do live in, unfortunately, a culture of mixed opinions, or of many opinions. And one of those opinions is that mental health doesn't affect devotees. But that's not what Bhagavatam says. If you look through the points that Srila Prabhupada states in his explanation, and even in the detailed purport of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, then you see a very strong affirmation that yes, this happens, it is a fact, people are disturbed. We're going to talk about how, why, what to do, and it's increasing. Why is it increasing? Because the age of Kali is going to become more and more intense. The atmosphere itself is so difficult, it's so challenging, it's so complex that already living in the world becomes it's an abnormal challenge. Kali Yuga means it's not normal. This is not what we as human beings are meant for. Unfortunately, we're still here. We didn't get out of this material world at an earlier stage in our spiritual evolution. So Kali Yuga has a very powerful influence, and this is just one point which I want to emphasize in terms of your answers, that there is an external influence that manifests in many different ways. It manifests just in the atmosphere. Okay, we're in Lechmore Heath, and right now we happen to be in Vaikuntha, here at Bhaktivedanta Manor, but everyone knows what it's like going into downtown London. It's a very oppressive, challenging, demanding atmosphere. The other Sunday I spoke about wending your way through the maze in Soho district with people there. It's not for human beings. So that atmosphere is very different. Making a living and feeding yourself is extremely difficult. People have to get one job, they have to get two jobs. Bhagavatam repeatedly talks about being overly taxed the government wants so much of your work. So that itself, we're not designed for this. So our programming is not set up in this way. And so life becomes so very difficult that these things bring something that everyone has experience with, which is stress. We get stressed out. And we get stressed out for these are some of the reasons. And then there's such a thing as karma. And that is the stress that we're already bringing from a previous life, because 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, we were somewhere else in Kali Yuga. Otherwise we wouldn't be here. And the impressions from those lives are brought over into this life. So very often we see some people just already start off in a very handicapped situation. In other words, they're already starting off with a certain emotional, mental burden. And also, you know, we use this word mental. I think we need to distinguish between also the mind and the brain. Because whereas in modern psychology that's not necessarily there, but for us we make, you know, the brain is a mechanism, is a gross mechanism, and the subtle mind, intelligence and false ego communicate through that mechanism and then to the senses. And that machine also can get damaged by different things or for different reasons. So I mean these are, and it increases. So why have we seen an increase? Well, because we progressed through Kali Yuga, and anybody who's been here for as long as I have, or getting near there, you've seen far out changes. I mean, the world has changed. Here we have an elderly gentleman, Pranabandhu. He's seen a lot of changes. And although he always shaves very clean, but if he had hair, it would be white. So, and it's not changing for the better. It's not changing for the better, with the exception of Krishna consciousness. There's a few things that I can really say that have improved in this world. And in my discussions with others, often I say, I'm glad I'm on my way out, and I'm not coming into this world. Now, with that positive outlook, I pass it on to you.
Well, thank you for bringing some humor to, you know, this topic can get quite heavy, so I appreciate the humor, Mahārāja. Actually, our first question really looks at whether there's a place for Krishna consciousness in improving our mental health, especially in this modern age with social media. And before we move into addressing this modern climate and social media, you know, this relationship between religion and mental health is a complicated one, and it's actually been being studied for decades. And actually the research is positive. You know, the research has identified key areas of religion, not just spirituality, but actually religion, where there's a structured pathway to having a connection, a relationship with God, and the benefits of that on our emotional, our psychological well-being. So I just want to briefly share a few of these pillars and then pose a question to Mahārāja. So first of all, the value system has been shown to be very, very helpful. Positive psychology is natural in spiritual and religious communities. Forgiveness, gratitude, kindness, honesty. And actually these are only things that now modern psychology is really addressing and calling positive psychology. We have the sacred space. That's also another pillar that's been proven to be helpful. The sacred space, or the sacred architecture, which we understand is designed in such a way that improves our mental health. The practices, prayer, meditation, community, having like-minded individuals who are helping you to grow. And last but certainly not the least, one thing that the research has shown is actually a relationship with God, but more importantly, a collaborative relationship with God. So not one which is of fear or guilt or punishment, but one which is collaborative, that there is a relationship, there's a dialogue, there's a locus of control where both God has some control and we also have control. So now these have been studied in quite an academic way, Mahārāja, and would you be able to please, for us, shed some light and go a bit deeper with some of these things in terms of Krishna consciousness and giving the Krishna conscious perspective on how these things really help our mental health?
There is a very interesting booklet of Srila Prabhupada, and it's called The Concept of Geeta Nagari. Now this precedes ISKCON. This is Srila Prabhupada back in Vrindavan. And here, Geeta Nagari, or the town where the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita are manifest, this was Srila Prabhupada's sort of name for what he later called International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And Prabhupada has a draft, sort of a manifestation of what this Geeta Nagari is. And one part of it is that he explains its function. Prabhupada talks about psychology and physiology. And it's very, very interesting. Just to boil it down, Srila Prabhupada points out that the basic problem is a spiritual one. The basic problem is that we have become, we as the spirit soul, and then he quotes, Mamaivangsa Jiva Loka, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, struggling with the material energy. So that we living entities are here in this material world and we've forgotten our original spiritual identity. As a result of that, we perform all kinds of wrong activities. Now you could say some are irreligious and sinful or foolish, they're harmful to us, they're harmful to others. All of these things result in certain reactions. And then Srila Prabhupada says those reactions manifest on the psychological level, and then they also manifest on the physiological level. Srila Prabhupada makes at no pains, let me just, one point where he says, if any treatment has to be done for the diseases of the human being, it has to be done from the very inception, from the internal potency. So the first part here says that Srila Prabhupada confirms, and if you read the article, Prabhupada confirms that yes, we accept the fact that human beings, which includes devotees, because they're also still human beings, that they have both physical, just like we get colds, we get COVIDs, we get all kinds of different things. Similarly, we also have mental, emotional, psychological issues. And Srila Prabhupada addresses that, but he points out that if you really want to get to the root of the problem, you have to treat the spiritual as well. You cannot neglect it. They are connected, they are interconnected. And that we should keep in mind not only for psychological problems, but also physiological problems. You may cure yourself of cancer, but if you haven't cured yourself of the cancer of ignorance of Krishna, then either this life or another life, that cancer is going to come back because you haven't dealt with the real cause. Because the cause is originally spiritual. So Srila Prabhupada points that out. So no question about it, we need to take treatment for our ills. But along with that, we need to actually solve the primary problem, the original cause of all of those ills, which is Krishna consciousness. And if we don't, it'll come back, even if it appears like it's temporarily being resolved. Does that address the point that you want to?
Sure, but Mahārāja, often when people are struggling with mental health problems, it's really hard to practice.
That's right. And therefore, you should get yourself in a situation where it becomes easier to practice, which means you receive that medication, treatment, guidance, whatever is required to get you there. We're just accepting the principle, not that everything has to immediately be done. Yes, and sometimes there's a priority.
What about when sometimes we might go the opposite way? That, okay, Krishna consciousness is the solution. I can neglect everything else. I can chant my way out of my psychosis or chant my way out of my depression.
Well, I would, I guess there's multiple answers, but one would be is that could work if you can chant with love. In other words, if Krishna wants it to work, then if you chant, in other words, ordinary chanting isn't going to work. It has to really be perfected chanting, and when you chant with Shuddhanam or Premanam, then the holy name can cure a lot of things. Maybe some of you have already attained that perfection, but if you haven't, then it's not necessarily going to work. And the other is, then we have Srila Prabhupada. Now Prabhupada could have cured himself. Krishna could have ensured that Prabhupada was cured, but that isn't what exactly happened. Srila Prabhupada, who was perfect in all ways, still succumbed to a certain ailment. So, no, we should not be thinking that I can, just by Krishna consciousness, I'm going to resolve this sickness. Just try it when you have a cold. Just chant your way out of a cold by chanting Hare Krishna. So we don't do that. What to speak of if you're in a difficult situation, who's experienced intense pain? Okay, quite a few people do. You have the experience. Smashing the wall. I was chanting Hare Krishna and I was doing that, but I was in no illusion that I was going to stop the pain by chanting Hare Krishna. So you can't argue with these things. You can't argue with these or just sort of wish them away. We need to do both. As Srila Prabhupada here says, you take care of the physical and you also take care of the spiritual. And if in order to do the spiritual, you first need to do the physical, then do that first. I mean, when I get up in the morning, you know, before doing daily worship, I get dressed. Because I take care of the basics in order to be able to do the spiritual. So it's like Srila Prabhupada would say, you do the needful.
But I want to address another extreme, which is the other side. And I think, you know, some of the reasons I want to bring up the extremes is because they're real. People do go to the extremes. What about the opposite? Sometimes we find that devotees using this principle that, okay, actually I've got to take care of the needful, end up neglecting their spiritual life, saying, okay, I'm going to wait until my mind is in tip-top condition before I go back to chanting.
Tip-top may be really a high shot. Devotees should always do things with proper guidance and understanding. I could ask who's given birth to children, and I see quite a few mothers. Srila Prabhupada was very understanding that when mothers give birth, that they're not going to be tip-top in terms of their spiritual practices. You can't just tell a newborn, well, just hang on, I'm going to Mangalartik and I'll be back in 45 minutes. Or you just can't tell them, well, listen, stop crying because you're interfering with my japa, I can't hear. So there are circumstances where it's just not going to be possible, and you can't just expect that, yeah, I'm going to get my spiritual life perfect before I attend to this. Don't neglect disease or fire. So you can't neglect it. And sometimes you may have to do a certain balance. You may have to do a certain compromise.
Just in terms of those devotees who've taken their vows, they can be riddled with a lot of guilt that they're having to compromise their vows to take care of their mental health. You have disciples who perhaps some have had to do that. How do you see that as a guru?
as long as it's healthy guilt, which doesn't result in psychological issues. In other words, another word for it is being responsible. We shouldn't be blasé about the whole thing. But that may be there. I just, I can't do it as well as I should. And if you need to check up or guidance, then why don't you check with my counselor or my spiritual master. I'm in this such and such situation. Is this acceptable or understandable? Because in principle, it can be. And we just need to deal with certain things. I mean, what happens if someone faints, and they're not fainting in ecstasy, but they're fainting due to some type of disease, and they're unconscious for 24 hours? Well, they didn't chant their 16 rounds. Well, what's going to happen? I mean, it's an understandable situation. And there are so many other situations where you may be conscious, but nonetheless the issue is so pressing that some compromise has to be made. And so Srila Prabhupada was understanding and said, all right, let's see if you can make it up in the future. And that's generally the direction that we go in. But yeah, we shouldn't be feel so guilty that then becomes problematic, or guilt becomes the thing that we let our mind drag us into a naughty situation.
Thank you. I think your answer has been really helpful, because it clarifies that the spiritual master in Krishna's mercy is always available, and they are aware that there are going to be challenging situations. And I think that's going to be reassuring for a lot of devotees.
What Srila Prabhupada said in that mother's example, Krishna is understanding. Krishna loves you. Krishna understands, now this person's in a certain situation, that's fine, but he's doing his best, and let time prove what they can do.
Mahārāja, I just want to change angles a little bit in terms of some of the things I've seen can trigger mental health problems. I mean, two key areas that really come up. One is identity. Whenever there's a change in someone's life, there's some shift, adjustment, letting go of some form of identity and embracing a new identity. It normally just comes under the umbrella term of stress, right? Or life changes, or stress caused by life changes. And our Krishna consciousness process is so much to do with identity. I've also experienced in my own life when there's almost something, I can't even put a word to it or describe it, but there's something very transformational about engaging with this process that makes the changes that we experience here much more manageable. Are you able to shed some more light on that side in terms of identity and how Krishna Consciousness can help us with that side so that this world doesn't seem so difficult?
It's such a wonderful thing that Srila Prabhupada gave us, that right from the very beginning we have this real sense of alternate, or rather real identity. Jivera Swaruphoy Nichera Krishna Das. You are Krishna's servant. Of course, we say that, everybody knows that, we tell other people we're all servants of God, but it's actually a very deep and a very significant truth, because it anchors us. And of course, the point of Krishna consciousness is that in due course of time, our perception of that identity becomes enriched and it matures. So we go towards the identity of what is our Swarup. Who are we as a servant? What type of service do we do? What type of spiritual body do I have? What kind of clothes do I wear? And we have a very holistic, beautiful, eternal identity, which is very joyful. But that's down the road, and we're heading in that direction. But in the meantime, we start off with this anchor, something that really anchors us down. And that's extremely important for us to have. And of course, Bhagavad Gita starts off with sort of the negative aspect of that, where Krishna says, and you're not this body. And when he talks about the body, he talks about the mind as well. So, Indriyani Paranyahur, Indriya Parammana, Manasasto Buddhir, Buddhi Parasastusa. He gives the hierarchy of the subtle body, the gross body, the subtle body, and then ultimately the soul. So this understanding that we're spirit, soul, it's such a wonderful thing, and that is why your spiritual masters, Vaishnavas, emphasize, be anchored, be reminded of this, because when you forget, then you get swept away by these constant changing identities, which are then molded or caused by the world that we live in, where, you know, one day it's like this, and another day it's like that, and there's so many conceptions and misconceptions that are superimposed upon us. You know, once you're a hippie, and next day you're a punk, and next day you're something else, and these different. But we should be anchored down in actually who we are, just like we're not an engineer, or not a father or a mother, but actually we're a servant of Krishna, we're spirit soul. And until that is a realized conception, we need to constantly remind ourselves. Otherwise, we get very easily swept into this constantly changing stream of who you are and who you're trying to be, catching up with the crowd, whatever the latest craze is. And that becomes extremely problematic, and especially today's youth. This world moves at a much faster pace than the world that I came into. I know that on occasion when I go to someone's home to preach, and they're watching television, and before I tell them to immediately turn the TV off, and the pace that thing moves at, I mean, it's dizzying. You know, in my day, it was like a ballet by comparison. So the world moves fast, and it is confusing. And if you're trying to identify with that, you're really going to get disturbed. Manda, Sumanda, Mandabhagya.
Actually, this moves us really nicely into probably the last area of this first half of the topic, or first half of the session before we open to the audience. This fast-paced world, it's getting faster and faster and faster. And now, I personally have strong views about digital media and the detrimental impact it has on people's well-being, physical and mental. And without going into a whole hour's explanation of why digital media is not good for us, just in a nutshell, my clinical experience is that it's really digital media, and I'm talking about all types of digital media, is really an evolving, constantly evolving, socially acceptable drug. It's not designed to help us. I know we hear that it's neutral and it's up to you what you do with it, but it's not designed to help us. It's designed to, at least that's what I've seen. It's designed to exploit us. And it follows us, it watches us, and that's what I mean. If you could design a drug that nobody would ever be able to come off, you would design a drug that evolves as your tastes and your needs evolve. And that's what digital media does, fast, 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 and it gives you everything on demand. But I also see that it has its uses, and devotees use social media. We used social media to set this up. We use digital media to let people know about today. So is there a way that spiritual life, Krishna consciousness, and digital media can work together? Or is it something that's best avoided?
I think Srila Prabhupada would answer that they can work together. The question is, are we qualified? Can we handle it? If I want to ask devotees, how many devotees have got pets at home or dogs? But if you do, if you have a dog, a cat, you house train them. house training a dog or a cat is relatively easy. If you're going to get a lion, especially a full-grown one, that's a different story. So this is a lion, and this is a multi-headed lion, and you cut off one head and two heads come back out. So you really have to know what you're doing to be engaged with social media and everything else that goes around. You know, Prabhupada said, yeah, the atom bomb can be used in Krishna service, and anything can be used in Krishna service, but are we qualified to do it? On the first debate, there was a debate that we had with Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu, I just cited that example, where Krishna forbade Arjuna to know about Yantra Vidya. This is Arjuna. This is not us. We don't fall in the category of Arjuna, Krishna's eternal associate. He's a king, he's a Kshatriya, he's a self-realized soul, he's so powerful, he can't do it. And I'll just raise the question. There was a time in starting 1965 up until 1977, which was called the Hare Krishna explosion. There was no mobile telephones, there were no computers, there were none of the things, there was no social media, there was no Facebook. Since then, can you show me anything that compares to what happened at that time? So you can say, well, we use all these things in Krishna service and make the words, well, okay, show the result that compares when none of these things were existent. So I know, for instance, there was a certain time in Hungary when mobile telephones came in, and I made this futile effort of convincing the yatra. Usually everybody listens to me, but this was one time where carte blanche, no one was willing to listen, where I said, let's not have mobile telephones in our society. Anyway, everyone thought I was joking. I tried to, usually I'm pretty good at making clear when I'm joking or not. But anyway, it didn't happen. There was a time in Hungary when I had to walk 2 miles to a telephone booth in the middle of winter to make a telephone call here to the UK for some particular purpose. And devotees were falling out of the sky to join the movement. I don't know how they knew about us, but they were coming. Sometimes we had to stop them moving in because the temple was too small. Same thing was happening here at the manor. Devotees, when I came here visiting in 1979, devotees were sleeping on the landing, they were sleeping on the stairs because there was nowhere else to sleep. There were so many devotees. So it's not a problem now. But we got so many great media for preaching. So is the lion eating us, or are we actually able to really use it? And sometimes we have to sort of back off and realize, I should keep my distance from this thing. I went on Facebook for about 23 seconds, and I saw it and I said, this is not for me, personally. Someone else has a Facebook page on Shiva, I don't know what it's called, and they put on some of these little videos, but I don't want to go there. I'll just finish quickly. When computers first came out, we used to have a place in Watford, which was called Watford House. What was it called? Croom House. Well, I renamed it Croom House after Croom Court, but it had another name. And computers came out at that time. I think the first computer that we had, there were little things, was 23 kilobyte. They were very, very small. And one night I stayed up all night writing computer, trying to write a program, because even then you had to sort of write your own program. And we had a Scottish devotee here who was programmer, and after that I said, never again. I'm not, it works, it doesn't work, I don't want to do any more than press the button and write. And if it doesn't do anything more than that, I don't want to go deep into this. This is really tamagun. And the more you go into this, the more you go into the depths of tamagun, and the mode of ignorance is not good for mental health.
Thank you, Mahārāja. So we'd like to open the floor to questions, please, and anything that's coming through online as well. There's someone there at the back.
Gaurangi all the way back there.
Haribol Gaurangi.
Just speak on the microphone and press it. It should come on.
Yeah, go ahead, try. So Mahārāja, do you want to take this question first? How do we support young devotees who've been brought up in the movement, going through opening up to the big wide world and identity?
Well, ideally, it should start with the education. That's whether devotees or non-devotees, we're meant to prepare the youth for the world. For us, real spiritual education, sense control, mind control are essential. These are what children are meant to learn. Now, that's not necessarily to say that parents are the best people to teach them that. Not because they don't know how to do that, but just because children know how to manipulate parents too well to get around those things, whereas, you know, ideally Prabhupada's idea of a gurukula or some other neutral personality, they behave differently. But nonetheless, that is what we need to do. In the absence of anything else, we need to prepare the youth, because the peer pressure that people come under in the world today is enough to drive you nuts. So and what to speak of someone who's still grappling with so many other things, because there's so many physiological and psychological things happening to a teenager, and they're, literally speaking, exploding already inside. So instead of having some external stability, there's more explosions going on outside. So yes, it becomes a very toxic atmosphere, and communication, preparation, good relationships with parents, knowing where the real shelter is, which is Krishna conscious guidance from their parents, and hopefully gotten to the stage where children know how to control themselves and not to become just a victim of the next, you know, craze hurricane that's blowing. It's a very complex situation, but it is a fact, and I'm glad I'm not growing up in the world of today.
I was just going to say that, you know, we understand that umbilical cord's cut when a baby's born, but when children become teenagers, the subtle umbilical cord is cut. It's the time when a child stops seeing their identity being tied to their parents, and they start to develop their own identity. So they will, their brain, their mind, their psychology, emotions will turn them to anything outside of their parents. And it can come across as rebellion, and it can come across as a dislike for parents, but that's not actually what it is. And I found that sometimes what can be really helpful is for children to just experience that their parents are there for them and love them unconditionally, and for us to take advantage of the fact that it does take a community and a village to raise a child. And often in teenage years, children will find their anchors in others, and if we can serve them by giving them healthy association, even if it's not coming from us, we're used to them listening to us, right? And it can be quite a shock for a parent. Oh, my child doesn't think that everything I say is the most wonderful thing in the world anymore. You know, and they seem to have forgotten everything I've taught them, and they give the glory to somebody else who said it, you know. Oh, this person taught me this, but that's a good thing. So I found that can be very helpful for young people who are developing their identity today. Hare Krishna. Anyone else?
Well, we left so much time for questions here. Here's one of it. Oh.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Hare Krishna. My name is Nurhan. I was in Budapest once, and I saw the devotees, and I was talking about Bhagavad Gita. When I was talking to them, I was saying, please take me to your Mahārāja, and I want to meet him. So it was time to meet you and get your blessing, and it is honor to meet you.
Hare Krishna.
And I would like to ask you, it's deep down actually. My daughter studied psychology, and she will be doing a master. So we are discussing about consciousness and conscious mind. And I met this knowledge much later of my life. And my husband was Hare Krishna follower, but passed away 2.5 years ago. So what happened is when they were little, I was taking them to a temple. And when my husband and we were chanting, but I was joining as a cultural way of it and respecting. But I didn't understand for years, and later on I understood. When my children were little, they were looking at me saying, Mom, do we believe in? I said, this is Daddy's religion, and I was Buddhist, I was atheist, sort of. Anyway, what I'm saying is, it took for me years to understand. And I was taking my children to science museum all the time and saying, that's your religion, that's your God. And now I understand that maybe it's meant to be like this, maybe they have to find their way to a different way. But what I want to ask you is, my daughter studied, as I mentioned, in psychology. Now we are discussing about conscious mind. And I was saying that, which, I mean, UCL is one of the good universities to teach psychology, but if scientists discover 10% of the brain, and if the psychology is very much related to brain and people's attitude and the way they look into life and everything, so if scientists find out only 10% of the brain, and I say to my daughter, how could you treat patients? And if you don't know the conscious mind, if you don't know everything about brain, so how could you help really to all the people? So we discuss about many things, Einstein, atom, and I say, if, for instance, Einstein found the atom, but then they discovered the atom bomb.
Thank you.
So what I am trying to say is that I really need help for that. I don't know how to help. Now, when I cook at home, I listen Hare Krishna.
Can you ask a question?
So sure. The question is, like, for young generation who gets love and caring from their parents, which is both of us with my husband, but studying in this society as a mom, who learn Krishna consciousness later of my life, actually. How can I explain to children that there is conscious mind, and also then once they understand that I can help them to chant and meditate, how can I explain to them this Krishna knowledge and conscious mind all together, like in Bhagavad Gita it says spiritual atom, and all this. I hope I explained to you, because I have to explain to them in scientific way as well.
So you would like better clarity on what's the relationship between the mind and the soul, the conscious mind and the soul. Mahārāja.
The soul is what's conscious. And the consciousness of the soul is spread throughout the subtle body. This is really something that I don't think psychology is really clear about, that there's such a thing as a false ego, as a substance. There's an intelligence, which is a little grosser substance, and then there's the mind, and then there's the brain, and then there's the senses which make up the body. All of these are conscious, but they're conscious because of the presence of the soul. Just like the electricity is on here, so there's light everywhere in the room, there's light on top of us, light is all pervading. When you turn off the light, then everything's dark. So the idea of a conscious mind is because there is soul, the consciousness of the soul. And the whole concept of consciousness is not well understood, because of course in an atheistic society that wants to deny the existence of the soul, then you can't figure out where this non-material substance comes from that activates everything else. And so we talk about Krishna consciousness, because when our consciousness is purified, then you no longer struggle with especially mental issues. Because one's consciousness is rooted, it's a pure, original, pristine state. And that's what we're trying to attain, and that's possible by connection with the holy name of Krishna. So it purifies actually our consciousness, but it's a process, and it takes time. And as that purification takes place, then things become better and better.
I mean, I think we're going to address this a bit more in the second half, but I think what you're also alluding to is that the consciousness being purified, that takes place on a mental platform as well. First, because the mind becomes a bridge to the soul, right?
They're all connected, yeah.
I think we'll have one last question and then we'll move into the second half.
Anyway, I'm glad we finally met. You looked for me in Budapest, you found me in London.
Okay.
You have to speak into the microphone. Especially the microphone doesn't work.
Do we have another one? The one that was on this side works, so I don't know.
Hare Krishna. I had two questions actually. One you already
Can you speak into the mic?
Sorry.
Speak like this.
Okay. This is the first time I'm speaking by the phone actually. I had two questions. First one was the same one the Mataji asks about explaining the atheist people about difference between mind and the soul.
And then the second?
The second one, because I have listened so many, I'm reading Prabhupada's books as well, so I am getting to know the answers. The second one, which you referred your way out, yourself, yeah, and I assume you referring to the mukti. Way out is the mukti. That's what you mean? When you were saying you're glad you're way out from here, from this world.
What was the question? I'm not clear on what the question is.
The question was, I was thinking about liberation.
What is liberation?
Liberation.
What is
getting a mukti when you fully dissolve in Krishna consciousness. There's two types. There's one bhakti, then the other one we talk about is mukti.
So what's the question in terms of, do you want to know the difference between bhakti and mukti?
No, I know the difference.
Right.
So because I thought Prabhu said that he's on his way out from this material world, getting rid of from the material world, going to Krishna, going back home.
Yes, that is real mukti.
That's the real mukti. That's what I'm referring to.
Yes, so,
to mukti. Yeah?
So going to Krishna,
yeah.
That is liberation.
Yeah. So what I wanted to know is what sort of things you're doing to going back to Krishna, to mukti, get to mukti.
So Mahārāja, how are you guaranteeing that you're falling in love with Krishna?
Well, right now we're trying to solve all of our mental and emotional issues that stand in the way. That's our main concern. There are obstacles.
Yes.
And we want those, how can we deal with the obstacles that stand in the way to becoming fully Krishna conscious? And there are real obstacles. It's no use saying that they don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So what our program here is about is how we actually, how are we going to deal with those? And that's just a patient is sick, we want him to get well, that is mukti. Now, how are we going to get there?
Yes, that's the question.
Yes, that's what we're talking about.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that one, please?
Okay, then we'll see if anyone has any. Well, our next session is about more of that.
Thank you.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna, Hare Bol.
Okay.
Thank
So, okay. Mahārāja, there's 2 online questions. Do you want to move into the next topic, or shall we address these? Shall we have a look? See if they're related?
Yeah,
Yes?
yeah, go ahead.
Can I have a look?
Sorry, I managed to write that first. I haven't finished the second one.
Just, oh,
If they're not related to this topic, we can bring them in the second half.
Can you read Mahārāja?
Yeah, I can read your handwriting. Okay. I think these 2 questions are related, so I'll ask them both together because they're similar.
The second says, accommodate the limits of individual devotees and people's mental health problems don't arise.
Okay, so I'm going to read both questions because they're tied together. So how
looks to
can
me
we...
like you need glasses.
No. No. How can we best... I was trying to read the writing.
optometrist over here in the audience.
How can we best identify and design a support system for devotees living in the ashram that might be experiencing mental health issues? And how can those who are managing and organizing temple communities recognize and accommodate the limits that individual devotees have in performing their services?
Can you abbreviate that?
Basically, how can we help devotees who are struggling within our communities, both from a managerial sense and a community sense?
They may need professional help. I came from an engineering background. I wasn't as fortunate as you. I didn't have to put that to very much use, but here, for those, there are people who have very deeply ingrained issues. I see and deal with many. I see very often also that myself, temple presidents, senior devotees, they are successful in managing easy to deal with issues, but sometimes it's just above them. Now, for instance, in Hungary, we have devotees who are mental health professionals, and then we also have non-devotees, but people who are very sympathetic and understanding to our values, beliefs, and way of life. We send it to them because it may be that it's not something that we can manage because we're not trained to do so. And of course, it's not necessarily the function of an ashram. We're here to educate devotees. If there are obstacles in that education, if we can remove them, fine. But if we can't, then we need to have professionals who can actually deal with that. I have no problem, no hesitation of doing that. And often I find it's a real relief from our leaders, because that's not their forte, that's not their strength, that's not why they're here. Although it's becoming an increasing need. Practically speaking, that even we have one devotee who now we've sent, just so that we have an even more in-house person to deal with such issues, because they're so frequent. Children don't have healthy upbringing. Very often, just a little while before I came here, I sat down with, say, 5 devotees. And I asked one standard question: are your mother and father together? No, 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 no. 5 out of 5. I thought, well, there's a good chance there's going to be some problems here. That's already just one. And then, of course, that's one of so many different things that are thrown at the youth today that really need dealing with, and which sometimes they come to Krishna consciousness artha jignasura for something that's, they're not necessarily just looking for Krishna consciousness. They see, here's a family, I never had a family. Here's a nice family atmosphere. Here's someone who, you know, a guru who becomes more like a father figure. But a guru is not necessarily meant to serve the function of a father. What to speak of serve the function of a husband. So, but these are realities that come up in the world today due to the lack of real quality upbringing that the children and the youth have. We need to be able to deal with it.
Okay, so in a nutshell, we should try not to do everything within the community and get the support of professionals.
Do what you can. That same thing. Someone comes to us with some chronic disease. What do? I'm going to start telling him, okay, let me take your pulse. Yeah, I think you got this problem, and here's some medicine for you. And I send them to a doctor. It's not... we want them to become Krishna conscious. Just because they're sick doesn't necessarily mean that they can't be Krishna conscious, but it should be a doctor who makes them well.
Thank you. So this brings us to the second half of this conversation, and we want to shift the focus a little. We've spoken a lot about how the practices, the philosophy, the anchoring of our identity in terms of Krishna consciousness can really help our mental health. But I've seen often in my work, mental health crises can be a catalyst for people to wake up to spiritual life, because society rejects you, because you no longer necessarily have an identity that is pleasing or a persona that's pleasing. You know, I've heard parents say, this is no longer my son, this is no longer my daughter here, you take care of them. You know, and literally just leave them. People are rejected by their friends, etc. And they start to question, who am I? What am I doing here? What's the point? So that crisis can be a real opportunity to go deeper. And as devotees, you know, we also see everything as a blessing. Whenever there's any change, any suffering, how's Krishna's mercy coming through this? So, Mahārāja, do you have any advice for devotees who might be going through mental health challenges, and how can we see that as a blessing from Krishna? How can we see a mental health challenge as a blessing from Krishna, particularly when we're already in Krishna consciousness?
You know, Krishna, or Lord Brahma says, I'm just trying to remember what Lord Brahma says in Sanskrit. As soon as I do, I'll quote it. That a Vaishnava sees everything as Krishna's mercy. That is our basic training. Although the external appearance of mental issues, emotional issues, physical, just like we had one of our devotees recently who had a stroke. Why does it happen? We have the whole epic of the Mahabharata, which is just one issue after another happening to the Pandavas. And you see Arjuna in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, he is about to have a nervous breakdown. So that's what it's about. So, because he's in such a crisis situation that he's being torn between, well, this is my duty, and those are my relatives. And, you know, it creates such a dichotomy between the two, so much pressure that he doesn't know how to deal with it. And of course, so he surrenders to Krishna. So, once again, it's the importance of our education as to how we see a situation, that can we see things as Krishna's mercy. Yasyaham anugrahami harishe taddanam shane. And Krishna says, because when I favor a devotee, then I take things away. And then on the other side, and still I can't remember the verse, Tattenu kampam sushamikshimanu bunjaya evat lakritam vipakam. So a devotee is on the right track, he's guaranteed towards Krishna. When that mukti pade dhoya bhak, here we're talking about mukti. So the gates to mukti are open to that devotee who knows how to accept everything. Disease, loss, etc., as Krishna's mercy. And that's our training. But for that, you have to be trained. You have to chant nicely, you have to have good sadhana, you have to read your vision, Shastra Chakshus. You have to be able to see things differently. And in my family, I was always at odds. That was after I joined Krishna Consciousness. My parents were never really devotees, and they weren't really so interested in Krishna consciousness. But when a member of the family, an acquaintance, or anybody died, I guarantee my mother was on the phone, you have to phone them up and talk to them. And you have to explain what happened. Why me? But it was always constantly, because they didn't have an answer. Their perspective was so dark, now everything's finished, everything lost. But that perspective that actually, no, he didn't die, she didn't die. It's the soul continues. And it was just a change of dress, is such a relief. So I'm just giving that as the perspective of how you look at things is extremely important. And one can be very negative and very dark, and the same event can be, I can't say joyful, because when you're in a real difficult mental state, things don't necessarily seem joyful. But the intelligence is above the mind. And if our intelligence is strengthened and is strong, then it actually gives guidance to even a disturbed mind. And that's what's extremely important. And of course, above that is what we talked about earlier, is the ego. So the ego that I'm Krishna's servant, that has to be very fixed. So that's fixed. The intelligence is fixed. Then the mind can actually be directed, and we can tolerate. Titikshava. So this is tam stitiksha shavarata. It's one of the first things Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. Just learn to tolerate it. And we need to learn to accept and live with some of these things, because they are of our own making. Not why me, because this is a result of my conduct, my life, my karma, and I have to own it and take responsibility.
That's really powerful what you're saying, Mahārāja, because it even addresses just the fact that on a material level, Krishna consciousness isn't always fun, especially after the first few years.
No.
And sometimes people exit just because it stops being fun. So I really appreciate that point. But I was also thinking, you know, with feeling low and sad and down, and understanding that, okay, this is a product of perhaps, you know, as you're saying, a product of what I've done previously, what I've invited. But is there also a blessing in that it's an opportunity for us to quite literally become fed up of the material world? Because that really does open the door to going deeper.
Yes. Because where did all these problems come from? Well, it came from the world that we're living in, the way that we lived in the world. And if this is going to be the result, I better look for an alternative. I better look for something better. And that's what Krishna is inviting us to. He says, come, you know, we're having fun. You don't have to get a job. You don't have to worry even about getting educated. I'm walking around barefoot. I never went to school. I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about Krishna.
Yeah.
So join the club. And they're having a good time. So yeah, it's a great alternative. It's a great place to go. And artha jignasur artha tigyani. So Krishna says, yes, those who are distressed, they also turn to him.
But sometimes that wisdom can be taken in the wrong way or misconstrued. So for example, you know, like you were saying, all of our problems are in some shape or form self-created and born of spiritual ignorance. So it becomes difficult when somebody is experiencing something externally that other people don't recognize, because mental health issues are invisible, right? You can't see what's going on in someone's mind unless you're very attuned. And physical health problems, they invite empathy and compassion and even advice. Oh, see, it's Krishna's mercy, now you've got more time to chant, or etc. But when somebody is struggling on a mental health level and they're trying to understand that this is ultimately born of spiritual ignorance, this can create some stigma from the community, that toxic guilt that we were talking about. So how can we understand this in a compassionate way, in a way that's helpful?
I was just reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the mood of Srimati Radharani, was quoting some scriptural statement. No one understands the suffering of another. I'll just give a personal example. Long time back, there was some very stressful situation here at Bhaktivedanta Manor. And that was about the first time in my life I came to the point where I couldn't go to sleep. Now, I never had that problem before. And I couldn't even understand it. And it was quite a difficult situation to manage. And I really didn't know how to cope with it. And I remember sitting, at that time Akandari Prabhu was the temple president, and we were sitting in his office, and I was sort of just sharing with him, you know, this is really difficult, and I don't know what to do, and it's really making me feel anxious. And then he just told me, he says, Mahārāja, no one will know what you're feeling. You just have to do whatever it requires in order for you to actually feel balanced. So it's a fact that people can be sympathetic, emphatic, but it's not really possible to know what someone else is going through. We need to be very clear about that. Now, I already said sympathetic and emphatic, so I can't repeat it again, but we need to be very emphatic about the fact that we can't really experience the suffering of another. And just like everyone put their hand up about physical pain, mental pain, from what I've seen, can be worse than physical pain. And, but it's very difficult to share. How do you communicate that to someone else? How do I feel someone else's? So it requires real understanding. And because this is a more subtle thing, And then, you know, without any prejudice or bias, in certain communities, and even in the Asian community, we like to sort of I don't like to deal with this. We don't get into this. We sort of put it out of the way. It's embarrassing. So let's not talk about it. But it's real. And as far as I know, if I understand right, I remember reading an article a long time ago that the World Health Organization says that in this century, 80% of the world's population, to some degree or another, have mental health issues. Big, small, little. Bhagavatam says manda, sumanda. Bhagavatam says 100%. But so to some degree or another, it's there. And it may come, and you may be very, very normal, and then at a certain point, circumstances may it's just like you may be healthy all your life, and then all of a sudden you're faced with some kind of really horrible physical disease that comes. So, yeah, it's a reality, and it's a reality that's increasingly more, it's stated there in Shastra. But it's not helpful to tell someone they're in Maya when they're in psychological distress, no, clearly. That's real Maya to say that. I mean, you don't kick somebody when they're down. So, in terms of this health of the mind, and you made a statement earlier that when our consciousness is purified, the mental disturbance goes. And in Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, also talks about how a devotee no longer needs the mind and intelligence to serve Krishna. Doesn't any longer need the mind, intelligence, or the body to serve Krishna. How do we understand this idea of a happiness separate from psychological happiness? And can spiritual happiness coexist with material psychological distress? I'll just digress and then bring me back if I've gone too far.
Sure.
This false ego, intelligence, and mind, we talk about as, we like to see them as sort of compartmentalized different things. Kapila Dev says in 3rd canto that there's the subtle body and there's these different ingredients, but you can only really distinguish them by their functions. In other words, you can only pinpoint the function. You can't pinpoint the substance. It isn't that one's here and the other one's there and the other one's over here. So they're all, they're different, they function differently. And they're all accompanying the soul. And the soul, similarly, now I've come back to your question, the soul actually thinks. The soul is extremely intelligent, and the soul has not false ego, but real ego. So the soul really knows who he is, a liberated soul, or she is. So thinking, feeling, willing, they're there on the transcendental platform. And we just want to make our minds healthy. And we want our intelligence to be pure. And we want our ego to be, ego means id, it means identity. We want our identity to be real, not false. And that's what Krishna Consciousness is about. We are not going to become mindless, but we're going to become really, really, well, I hate this mindfulness, but we're going to be really mindful. It's a real cliche word.
So is it possible to be spiritually happy but psychologically distressed? Is it possible to feel both simultaneously?
Spiritually happy, psychologically distressed? No, someone who is spiritually now happy means that he's transcendentally situated or even well fixed in Krishna consciousness. They will be properly situated, but Arjuna was distressed. So they may find themselves in a situation of distress. But I would say that it's not in the same category as someone who's not well situated spiritually and is distressed.
Okay.
So you can have a eternally liberated soul appearing to be very sick. He has some kind of malady. Srila Prabhupada had, his kidneys were non-functional. So he, more or less, that's what he passed away from. The appearance of that, especially when you're talking about a very happy or a liberated person, someone who's really attained perfection, their mental distress, like Arjuna, is caused by Krishna. Their Prabhupada's health condition is something which is going on under Krishna's direction. It's different. But from our point of view, the answer would be yes.
Yes. So at a certain point in someone's spiritual life, when they are spiritually evolved, they can experience spiritual happiness.
Srila Prabhupada was here in 77 September in his rooms. And he called Tamal Krishna Maharaj. It's there in Prabhupada Lilamrita. And he said, my mind is really disturbed. I can't think. You're a smart boy. You take care and decide what to do.
Thank you. I know I was pushing the point, but I feel it's really important because there is so much stigma, almost to the point where people can feel like, am I going to be bereft of spiritual advancement just because I don't have a healthy mind? Because sometimes people don't find a solution in this lifetime.
Yeah, my point was with someone of Srila Prabhupada's category that why that happens and how that is may be different to something that a sadhaka experiences.
Sure.
But from our point of view, when we're perceiving it, it more or less looks the same.
Sure. So we've established that a healthy mind is...
Prabhupada would say things, Prabhupada is lying in Vrindavan, and he's referring both to his physical and his sort of mood. He says, how are you feeling, Srila Prabhupada? Now I forget the exact word. Anyway, he says, it's like catastrophic. Prabhupada was... So here's someone, who's giving Krishna consciousness to everyone around the world, and he's saying, I'm devastated. So we're human, and we're in this world, and these, whatever body and mind we have, nonetheless, we're still living in this world and going through the influences of this world. Be someone transcendental. It's our concept of spiritual and transcendental that needs to be clear. And not that otherwise Srila Prabhupada would often say, and he's had this other letter where Prabhupada says, if you think that spiritual means that there's no problems and everything's euphoric, he says that's impersonalism. That's not what spiritual is all about. Otherwise, you take away the variety, you take away the experience of life. Because the experience of life isn't, so even you go to the spiritual world, but then the rumors of the demons are going to come and you're going to experience fear. And you're going to experience so many things, but they're all spiritual. So if you read Nectar of Devotion and you read the Sattvika, Vyabhichari Bhavs and so on, you see all of these different transcendental symptoms of ecstasy, madness, laziness, inertia, and so on. But they're not material, they're all spiritual. They're all transcendental. So when we say chant and be happy, you've got to redefine your concept of what happy is going to mean, because you have to read Prabhupada books, then you find out, well, there's a different type of happiness.
Actually, this brings me nicely to the last point before we open up for our last block of questions from the audience. Earlier you said that when our consciousness is purified, this kind of mental distress stops. And at the same time, you're also acknowledging that there's the human experience, even in somebody like Srila Prabhupada, who's achieved and has spiritual perfection. So, I didn't warn you of this question, so forgive me if it's a curveball. In Antya-lila, chapter 14, text 53, describes Lord Chaitanya's ecstatic symptoms and describes the 10 bodily transformations resulting from separation from Krishna are anxiety, wakefulness, mental agitation, thinness, uncleanliness, talking like a madman, disease, madness, illusion, and death.
Chant and be happy.
So, on the surface, and I'm thinking, just like a psychiatrist here, I'd be looking at that thinking, okay, that person could walk into my clinic, and how would I know if they're experiencing transcendental symptoms of ecstasy versus psychological or mental illness? Because actually, I would love to have the privilege of one day being referred to someone who actually isn't psychotic and actually they're in ecstasy. But how do we tell the difference?
For them, all you have to do is chant Hare Krishna and they'll get out of it.
They'll come out. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maharaj. So let's open up questions to the audience. There's one here, over here. And then the person at the back. There's a gentleman in the back as well.
Hare Krishna. The knowledge of the knowledge of how a person's psychology works didn't seem relevant when I first joined. We just thought you chanted Hare Krishna and, oh, he's on the mental platform, so don't worry about him. He needs to get into his rounds. And then as we go on, we see there's so many things that you have to learn, even how a vehicle works if you're going to get from A to B. And it didn't seem like important knowledge, it seemed mundane knowledge. Now it seems mental health is such a big problem now. So as devotees, do we need to take time out to study the subject so that we can address and communicate with people who are having all these different difficulties?
I don't know about devotees becoming all, healthcare professionals, mental health care professionals. We need devotees who are, just like we need devotees who take care of, we want devotees who are our doctors, taking care of our physical body. We want devotees who are also taking care of our mental body as well. Why? Because we trust them more naturally, because they can relate to us in our lifestyle. They're not going to give us solutions that go contrary to our values. But I don't believe everyone should be trained to do that. That's not something that, we're not all going to start a school and then Citi-Śakti is going to start teaching everybody. Our business is to give Krishna consciousness. But it is something that we need to be able to deal with. And amongst other things that come up, this isn't the only issue. There are a lot of identity issues that come up that are not from the psychological issue, but maybe from the gender issue. And that's something new to deal with. But it needs to be there. One way or another, we need to be able to provide something, or we can't take responsibility in ashram life for someone, and we need to see if we're in the counseling field who we can actually refer to someone. And when, for instance, people fit or don't necessarily yet fit into either the ashram life or even into a counselor group. They may require some more help before they actually, so that they don't just project all of their issues on others who are going in a completely different way and doing a different life. You wanted to add something to that?
No, I think you've said everything. I think it would be unrealistic to expect everybody to train in it because people are not going to naturally all feel inclined to study the subject. But yes, I agree. We probably need a few more. But there's a scarcity globally. in people trained in this area, because it's tough, you know. So anyway, I think we have 2 questions at the back, Vishwambara Prabhu, and then there's a gentleman in the middle in the second to back row.
Hare Krishna. Something came to my mind. I wanted to address this question to Citi-Śakti, and then Mahārāja also can. I have a friend of mine, and he's left ISKCON because he was going through some stress. And he told me that it's difficult for him to come back because his surrender was misused. You know, he revealed his mind to some senior devotees about his problem. And that problem was not contained properly, so he was let down. In other words, his stress was calling for some help. But instead of then help, he was identified as a problem.
As a what?
As a problem.
Oh.
He's a problem, so therefore, they not only they could not help, but you know, they broke confidentiality. So my friend, he said, because my surrender was misused, so I am afraid to surrender again. Now my question to you, do, you know, senior devotees, do they really need some kind of a crash course, you know, like in the, are you a psychologist or psychiatrist? What are you?
Psychiatrist.
Psychiatrist, okay. We don't expect all these senior devotees, to be expert in that field. But what can the society do to improve, you know, and be a little bit more proactive rather than reactive, destructive on these things? So the devotees, they feel, you know, cared and not seen as a problem, because everybody has got problems. You know, if someone doesn't have a problem, it means if you say you don't have any problem, it means you want to sell me something. I
Sure.
think everybody.
So I mean, it is a challenge, and I think just as a community, we will turn something into more of a problem if we don't know where the viable solutions are. Okay? If we don't see a solution, it becomes the problem, the person becomes a problem. But just stepping away from that, first of all, going back to what Mahārāja was saying, yes, we should have greater access and signposting to this kind of help, more understanding around it. But in terms of confidentiality, I mean, actually as Vaishnavas, confidentiality is part of our culture, it's part of our Siddhanta, revealing our minds in confidence and hearing from others confidentially. It's part of the 6 loving exchanges. So that training, you know, yes, it can be given as basic listening skills training and psychological training and helping people, but actually that training's there in our culture as Vaishnavas. So really, if someone's coming to us in distress, even if we are not able to help, and we feel that somebody else needs to be brought in, we should at least have enough respect for that person to say, okay, you know, I don't know if I can help you with this, but I do need to tell someone just because I feel like you're at risk. And do I have your permission to share? And who do I have your permission to share with? Now, we can't go back, unfortunately, and change the situation for the devotee you're talking about. But moving forward, I think this can, you know, this attitude can help a lot of us deal with some difficult situations. It's okay for us to not know. It's okay for us to seek help elsewhere. But we do need to seek the other person's permission to you know, let somebody else into that confidential space.
I don't have anything to add to that. Okay. I'd like to, before the next question, and I think there may be, just to emphasize the subtleness of mental and emotional issues. I keep sort of separating the two, but I guess they're connected. another topic is what's emotion, as opposed to what is mental. And that is that karma, in terms of action and reaction, are very important. Today's world of entertainment revolves around unprecedented violence. From children at a very young age, all they see is violence. Whoever's playing these games, video games, it's all about violence. Movies, etc., etc., the language, our communication. People become extremely aggressive. Aggressiveness means you got both aggressors and victims. It's an impression. That's one. But there are many. Things come from our previous lives. Sometimes something may just surface. Where did it come from? And we're surprised. And that is because a conduct of our previous life has made a certain impression within our subtle bodies, and the reaction becomes ripe at a certain stage in this life. It's not when we're 1 year old, it may be when we're 21 years old, or 41 years old, or 60 years old. That reaction ripens, and all of a sudden, we're faced with some mental distress that may have come up in a very harmonious situation. Say, for instance, you're living in a very good, under good circumstances, but still it comes up. So it becomes, people around you can't understand, where did all this come from? So the reason I'm making this point is, you cannot underestimate the importance of the quality of a sattvic lifestyle. If you're living a rajasic, tamasic lifestyle, you will incur mental problems, you will create problems for yourself in this life, and if you happen to come back in the next life, you'll be creating it in the next life. And if we're experiencing problems in this life, that means that we can't explain, it's coming from a previous life. So, study up, 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Krishna's talking about what it means to live in the mode of goodness. And it's such an important thing, and mode of goodness means you restrain from some things, such as, for instance, these violent type of entertainment, and other type of absolutely futile things. In this list of things, Srila Prabhupada lists that are a waste of time and that are destructive for healthy psychology. He lists sports and other things as well. So know what it means to live a healthy life. You just can't have it both ways. You can't do whatever you want and then expect that you're going to be healthy mentally and physically and spiritually.
Thank you, Mahārāja. I think there's a question at the back. Yeah, we've got another 12 minutes, so we've got time.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Please accept my humble obeisances. So you answered one of the questions earlier, which is, can spiritual happiness and psychological distress coexist? I think you said yes. So in my mind, that sort of contradicts a couple of items, a couple of teachings from Bhagavad Gita and Nectar of Devotion that come to my mind. One is in Transcendental Knowledge, where Krishna is saying that as the fire, the blazing fire burns firewood into ashes, the fire of knowledge would burn the reactions of all material activities. So that's one. And the other one, I think in Nectar of Devotion, where it says that devotional service can also counter phalam mukham, which is these, this fructified distress or the reactions. So yeah, so Guru Maharaj, if you could elaborate on that, is it actually contradictory or?
Yeah, I understand. That's very good. One thing is that those 10 symptoms of separation are symptoms of ecstasy, anxiety, and so on. So they're transcendental symptoms. The other is that even though someone may have burnt up all the reactions to one's past activities and is not suffering due to karma, but then Srila Prabhupada also says that the spiritual master may suffer as a result of the karma of disciples. Similarly, devotees are engaged in preaching, they're acting in the role of spiritual master, they're going to experience a lot of distress. You go out on book distribution, you're going to experience a lot of stress. You try to pay for the construction of this Haveli, you're going to be responsible to the bank for paying it, you're going to be experiencing a lot of distress. So, but that distress is in the service of Krishna. So it's different, and that's the important thing, is to see the difference between what happens on a spiritual level and that what is happening when we are still materially conditioned and as a result of our past.
Okay, so we have a question here at the front.
Hare Krishna. This is a bit of a heavy question, but people always say Krishna only gives us what we can handle, but then why do people either want to or actually do take their own lives?
Why?
So everyone says Krishna only gives us as much as we can handle. So why is it that people sometimes feel like they want to or actually do end up taking their own lives?
Krishna may give us something, but then we need to see and we need to be confident that, all right, I have the resources around me to be able to deal with this particular situation, and I need to be able to find those resources. Krishna's testing, or Krishna wants to see how strong is our faith, remind us what the material world is all about, give us a little token of our past karma, but then we're in a circumstance as devotees that we do have access to guidance, help, and so on, but we need to be able to take it. And that's very important, to be in the right atmosphere, because people take their lives when they go down into ignorance. In other words, when things become, ignorance means meaningless. That everything becomes meaningless, and meaningless means that I no longer see things in a spiritual way, which means I withdraw and stay away from real spiritual association. And that's why it's very important to be in that situation. I've unfortunately had the experience of, from my godbrothers to other devotees recently, of taking their lives. And they were in states of mental distress. That's why I say that it can be so painful and it can be so hopeless. It's not hopeless, but we need to know where to actually get the help, and then we need to be able to take the help. And of course, that's not just the responsibility of the unfortunate devotee, but it's also the responsibility of devotees to be able to recognize, respond, and sort of go out of their way to help.
Maharaj, I mean, I know it's audience's questions, but just off the back of that, also, there's some understanding that not everything we carry in our mind is our own. We also get affected by the impressions of other people around us as well.
Very much so.
And this mood of suicide, taking your own life, anxiety, it's quite prevalent in the global consciousness. There's a lot of fear and anxiety. What in our Krishna consciousness can really protect us from the onslaught of the things around us? You know, it's everywhere, online, people talk about it, it's everywhere.
Well, one thing is, don't get online so much. And we got our online, well, I was going to point to this, but this is where I have all my books. Online is being online to Krishna, and we really need to have that very, very strong connection, because as I mentioned in the beginning, the atmosphere of Kali Yuga is such that even if you're sane, you go crazy in this world. The other impressions that come on you, the influences, and those go into different strata. It goes to being online, it goes to being on to, you know, the supernatural. I don't want to get into it, but that's also there. So there are other beings, and there have always been other beings. You read Puranas, Mahārāja, and so on, full of ghosts, Rakshasas, so on. The more you get into this technology, the more you become susceptible to them, because you're getting onto their wavelength. And the more we stay in the mode of goodness, then the more we become impervious to them. So it's something to be very careful about. There are, other than just, you know, our own mind, there are other people's minds who are trying to affect ours. And it's not just Bill Gates. Poor Bill Gates.
So Maharaj, there are a couple of questions that have come in online. They're all really resonating the same, a few of them are resonating the same point. This question that there are a lot of devotees who are struggling, they end up taking things in their own hands, and they end up not being willing to accept help. How can we serve those who we can see they need help, but they're not willing to accept it? Is there a way?
That's a difficult situation. You know, that's the beginning of any type of remedial approach. Is I'm sick, I need help. Shishashte sharimam tvam prapanam. So that's the first thing. Arjuna says, all right, you got to help me. And there may be a limit as to what we can do. I mean, it isn't that we're meant to solve every problem, that we're supermen. We're also extremely limited, no matter how, I mean, you must have more, you've got more experience than I do in that sense. How much can you really help somebody? For instance, here on the spiritual level, we do the same thing. We try to help, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to listen and that everyone's going to do the best thing for their spiritual welfare. Same way, people will not necessarily do that. And that then becomes a really problematic situation. What's your experience?
Well, you know, I think if we create a culture of people seeking and getting help, I think that helps, creating an environment where it's okay to ask for help. See, in my profession, there's legal things in place. When someone's gone past a certain point where they need help, if they no longer have the capacity to make that choice, we can intervene legally and actually force help on them. So there's that side, but by the time somebody gets to that stage, they're really, really quite unwell. And it is better people get help before that, because then the help you need is less intense and it's much quicker to recovery. So yeah, if we can, my personal opinion is if we can create a culture of it being okay to ask for help and having that help accessible, because I think there's still a stigma amongst devotees that, you know, I want to come across as a good devotee, so that means I can't have any problems. And last but not least, I think this is quite a sweet question. We're often told that we want to imbibe the mood of the acharyas, like Bhaktivedanta Thakur or Narottam Das Thakur. But from their bhajans and pastimes, it may seem that they're in distress from separation from Krishna, or in their genuine humility, they lament their lack of Krishna consciousness. Can you explain this type of distress, the contradiction of ecstasy and feeling unqualified?
Well, they are all in the moods of being practicing devotees. And even though they're liberated souls, eternally liberated souls, nonetheless, they're really placed, just like Arjuna is placed in a certain situation where he becomes obliged to ask about Bhagavad Gita, get the guidance of Bhagavad Gita. Similarly, they are in the position of sadhakas. They feel like sadhakas in order so that we know how to perfectly practice Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, unless we get guidance from the perfect teachers, then how do we know how to actually practice properly? So they are the perfect teachers for us. And they show us how to actually overcome these issues that crop up in life. If you read Bhaktivedanta Thakur's biography, it doesn't seem like there's any time when he's healthy. He is always sick, physically sick. Why is he physically sick? At the same time he says, Kamala Manjari, my spiritual identity is Kamala Manjari. So why is Kamala Manjari always sick? But he is, and part to do with the fact that he's taken on the burden of preaching and giving Krishna consciousness to others. So we have examples of these personalities who live in this world. They identify with us, and they give practical examples. Just like for me, Srila Prabhupada is, you know, his life is followable by anyone. So anyone can follow it. He's a student, goes to school, he's always Krishna conscious in school, he's always studying Bhagavad Gita, he gets married, he has children, he's initiated, Varnaprastha, he becomes a sannyasi, he goes to preach. So it's not like he just 8 years old and he became a sannyasi. Anyone can live the life that Srila Prabhupada lived. And he set that example. So anyway, acharyas are also setting an example for us. And so they also lament. Now the question is, do we lament? We really got to lament. That's part of the thing that they're teaching us. You have to want it.
Maharaj, thank you so much for giving us your time, for being a pillar and rock for this community, and giving us so much love and compassion.
Anyway, thank you very much for being here and helping the devotees and giving the kind of guidance that we really need. And of course, you're in the mental health field. We have some other doctor devotees who are also very helpful in the physiological. We need good guidance and help, either in this department or that. And we need to be good patients. That's a very important thing. We need to be careful. We don't make life is already difficult in Kali Yuga. Don't make it more difficult.
Thank you. Thank you to the audience for your wonderful questions. His Holiness Shiva Maharaj ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Citi-Śakti Devī Dāsī ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Can we have 3 loud haribols for our esteemed speakers today? Haribol! 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 Jai. Thank you so much for attending today. This was a very, very deep session.